Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
Okay, so I have this projector in my basement and a 92-inch screen, so it's like huge. It's a very small space. It's very large. And I got an adapter so that I could plug in my Nintendo Wii, which is old composite video. I had to get a whole adapter thing so that I could do HDMI. It was like a whole thing. And I plugged it in, and I'm telling you, the pixels on that screen were like this big. Like each pixel was almost a full inch on the screen, because it's like 480p is the best that it can do. So it's like this square in the middle of the screen, and the resolution was just absolutely awful. It was hilarious. I don't know, it's been a while since I've gone back to something that was so old.
Were you even able to like play it with it being like that pixelated?
Yeah, you can still play it. Like, I don't know, I felt like I adapted. It was still a little bit weird to play Mario Kart at such grand pixelation, but I mean, you can still play it.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Well, I was just say that's so funny because I gave my nephews, they're 3, 5, and 7. I gave them my Nintendo Wii this year because when I moved, I uncovered it, had totally forgotten I had one, and so I wonder if that's how they look at it, like when they play it, because I know that they play it because I've gotten pictures, and they're probably like, "What is this old technology?" And like I still have like a Nintendo from like the late 80s, early 90s in my basement that I held on to, and they would look at that and just be like, that's archaic. So
yeah, that'd be even lower resolution.
Yeah.
Each pixel would be like the size of your head.
Mario Kart's a great game.
Oh, it's so much fun.
It was the reason to buy a Wii, because of the steering wheel.
Yeah, but I didn't like that. I like the classic controller.
Well,
you can't. No, it's not the same.
I like the steering wheel.
Yeah, the steering wheel.
We can't play the game we used to play with the steering wheel. It doesn't work. Like the Wii ruins the game. I don't know if it's appropriate for the podcast. So Tom's frat house in college had this game called Don't Drink and Drive, but you had to play it on the old Nintendo Mario Kart with a classic controller, and you had to finish your beer and win the race, but you couldn't drink the beer while you were holding the controller. So when you crashed, you would throw your controller down and chug your beer. And if it was Rainbow Track, because it was so long, it was 2 beers.
Oh man.
So
and of course, then you're always crash. I feel like though Rainbow Road, you get plenty of time.
First of all,
people have barfed from Rainbow Road.
What a great Wisconsin game to play.
It was in Wisconsin.
I know he went to school in Wisconsin.
So we tried it with the Wii. We were like, oh, this is awesome. And because it's not the same, you don't have all that crash time, you can't really play the game. You have to just put down your controller and drink instead of doing it during the crash.
So it's almost like it was made for kids, not for adult drinking games.
Right. Go figure.
Great Fascinating.
Game. Highly recommend it.
Fascinating.
That's hilarious.
Well, speaking of things that are for adults and not for kids, what's our topic today? I think it's Power Automate. Should we talk about Power Automate?
Probably should.
Oh, yeah.
Probably we should.
Excited.
Not tied at all to Rainbow Road or Mario Kart, unfortunately. So today, let's do a little overview on Power Automate. I've been thinking about some things, but I'm curious to know, Ashley, what are your thoughts on Power Automate? As I know you just got one going.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that. Because I've been working with Dynamics for over 10 years now, and this whole idea of workflows in there. I wouldn't say I was slow to adopt those, but at every company they have their ways of doing change management and things like that. So every company, you couldn't do workflows because it was too much change or things like that. So I didn't start using workflows until probably 4 or 5 years ago, just because of that. And then now this whole thing of Power Automate and building flows, and it's completely different. Workflows still have their place, I would say, in Dynamics, but speaking of Power Automate, it's just, I would say, it's a transition from being a Dynamics administrator, it's been a tough transition. Like you said, Merlin, I just got my first flow. I've probably been playing with Power Automate for a year and a half. Not consistently, but on and off with different things. And I finally got my first flow to work this just recently. And that's frustrating, I would say, as like somebody who's been doing this for so long, that like it takes that. I feel like there's a huge learning curve, and it's frustrating. It's hard. But there's a lot of benefits and power to the Power Automate tool. I've actually recommended it in other ways to like the company that I work at now, to use it, because there's so much more you can do with it than just Dynamics. So I see the power of it, but it's going to be a huge learning curve. Liz, I don't know if you feel the same.
I do. Yeah, I think our backgrounds are similar. We're both not developers or super technical. And so I think it's hard from like a functional or a CRM admin perspective you have to learn new things like the web API stuff, and kind of change your mindset of you can connect to any database, any application, and you can't, like, we're used to just having our entities and our fields, our tables and our fields or her columns in the workflow where it's easy and they're just there because it's all in Dynamics. But with Power Automate, obviously it can do so much more. So you have to pull that in. And I think Ashley and I, we both agree that just, it's something you have to adjust to and plan for when you're building it.
Well, and just things so basic, like you just said, like when I was building, this flow now that I have working, like calling all attributes for like a table, like, because I use the fetch XML, like people have taught me to do, and I pulled that in, but it didn't call all attributes. It only called some attributes. So then I'm like, well, why aren't all of these fields populating like I'm asking them to? And, but those are just like little simple things that just take time to learn, where in like a workflow, you don't have to think about.
Right.
Pulling all of that data in. So so a developer told me Power Automate's only going to do what you tell it to do. So if you don't tell it to call in that data, it's not going to call it in. So you have to like completely change your thinking. And I'm not trying to like be like a downer on Power Automate, because I think it's so powerful. I just think as like a functional person, it's like a huge learning curve, and it's going to be a big change. It was almost like a developer created Power Automate because they didn't want to spend so much time coding. That's kind of how I look at it. Like it's like a shortcut to coding for a developer, so they can read it.
That's actually a pretty good way to look at it, I think, because that's,
Yeah.
I mean, my impression is that that's what Microsoft is trying to accomplish, is something that gives you more capability, closer to development, but without requiring you to actually be a developer. But I mean, to your point, it does also require being further like along that development path, or thinking more like a developer to get it to do all the things that you want it to do, just because it has that more power.
Right. So if you're not used to thinking like that, it can be kind of challenging.
So I know I usually, when I get stuck on stuff, I just ask a developer for help. Like that's been my solution. I'm like, hey, can you explain this part to me? Like, I don't get it. So I think if you have a more of a functional, less technical background, like I think that's the easiest way to figure it out.
And I think that also just not getting frustrated or giving up, because that was kind of like me, I would say, about a year ago, as I got so just frustrated with it. I even called a couple of MVPs, Power Automate MVPs, and it's like, I cannot get this to work. And, they only have, you can only expect them to spend so much time with you and that kind of thing. But like, I gave up on it. And so I've finally just repicked it up just a few months ago, and was like, I have to learn this, because in order to stay relevant in the space, I think as a functional person, you do have to be able to adapt and bring in these new technologies that Microsoft is offering. So yeah.
Yeah, I think too, starting with something simple, like don't try to start with the world's most complicated flow. Like pick something basic and kind of like build up, to where you need to be or want to be. And then that would be easier than, I don't know, trying to take your most complicated workflow and replicate it in Power Automate.
Right. Well, and I guess that might not even be the right approach, right? Is to take your most complicated workflow and then try to replicate it, because I guess I would start with a scenario where I want to do something that I would normally need a developer for, but I could do it with Power Automate instead. I can't do it with a workflow. Like, I feel like the classic example is like the child record update. Oh, I want to keep the account and the contact addresses in sync. So if I change it on the account, I want to change it on all the contacts. Of course, you can't do that with a workflow. And I feel like that request has come up so many times over the years. But you can do that with Power Automate. And so maybe that's a spot where you say, okay, it's a little bit complex in that I can't just do it with a workflow, but it's not, I'm not calling other APIs. I'm not trying to move data to like some external system. I just want to loop through some data and make some updates. It's probably a good spot to start.
Yeah, I would say when I started on the one that I was finally able to complete, I was following kind of a format of functionality that's no longer available in Dynamics. And I think that's my hardest part, like when I work with Power Automate, is that when I go out to like resources and try to get help on it, it's not specific to like my tool. Power Automate is so broad in what it can do that, when you're like, oh, stuck on this one thing, they're like, oh, here it is for Office 365 or for this other thing. But that's not an apples to apples comparison of like how it would work for Dynamics. And I think that that's where my frustration kind of comes in, because like, I'm like, no, I just want somebody to show me how to build this for Dynamics. And so that's like the hard part, I would say, for me. So when I built this flow, I was going off of like scheduled processes, which are obviously not available in Dynamics anymore. And I was like, well, I can do this in a flow. And so that's how I moved, started to do this flow and I got it to work, was because I kind of had a template from something that wasn't available before. So going back to like what both of you said, like start from something kind of simple. Don't overshoot what you're trying, don't go shoot for the stars, I would say, like on the first one, and do something small and realistic on the first one. And, but I, have it scheduled. It's pulling a list of records. It's definitely a cool thing that it's doing. But I started from like a template of something else.
So I have a question. I know there's some people out there that think because Power Automate's the new thing that everything should be built in it. If a workflow can meet the need, is it still okay to use a workflow?
Oh, that's a tough one.
I think Merlin and I are going to disagree, because I would say yes, as a Dynamics admin, if I know that I can build a workflow in 5 minutes to accomplish a problem, I'm going to do it in 5 minutes, because it's going to take me a lot longer to learn how to do it in Power Automate today. So as an administrator, that's my answer, is like a functional, like day-to-day kind of thing. Now, the recommendation that I try to keep telling myself and I tell other people is someday workflows are going to go away. We don't know when. Obviously this whole Power Automate thing was built to replace the workflows. I think that's kind of what we all see. And I don't want to get stuck like not knowing it. So, like with this one, I built the flow because it couldn't be done. And so I don't know. I would say that there's a place for workflows still, but that's just my day-to-day. I know it because I can do it quickly.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I know that you think that I thought that I would disagree, but I think there are still valid use cases, I think, for workflows. And to your point, if you can build it in 5 minutes to do something that's simple and self-contained within Dynamics, then, why not? And consider that there are still some things that you can't do with Power Automate that you can still do with a workflow, right?
A real-time workflow.
Exactly. You want to run something in real time, like you don't have a choice. And I feel like, yes, we're all expecting that someday Power Automate is going to take over and workflows are going to be deprecated. But I have to assume that the transition process will be made easier by Microsoft before they turn off workflows. So I guess I don't know that you have to be afraid to still build workflows, because I assume there will be ways to transition them somewhat easily, or maybe the whole workflow engine will somehow get plugged into Power Automate in some way that I can't foresee.
I don't see them getting rid of workflows anytime soon. Like, I know we're afraid of that, but it's just such a big change that I think we would have a ton of time and a ton of warning. I don't know. Yeah. I don't see it happening. And it's
fascinating because, like, I asked an MVP about that, like, when do you think they're going to deprecate them? And they were like, well, technically they're already deprecated. And I was like, well, but
really?
Not really, because they're still functional. They're still, you can still get support on them. But like in theory, Microsoft is pushing you to use Power Automate and build flows. So I guess it just depends on what perspective you have on if that means they're deprecated or not. So I'm not sure.
I mean, if they're not on a list of deprecated features on a web page from
I don't-
Microsoft, then they're not.
Yeah, I was
I
gonna
agree.
say, I don't think
They're
they
just-
are.
They're just
Right. But I'm
discouraged
just
from-
saying, I think, I would say maybe discouraged. So
Right.
I think it's all just doing what you're comfortable with, but definitely try to jump in and use Power Automate. But
Yeah.
I mean, from a
You
functional
also-
oh, go ahead, Marilyn.
I was just going to say another consideration is licensing, because the way that Power Automate is licensed is by executions. So if you have something that's happening a lot, you could theoretically tap out the Automate runs that you're licensed for, and workflows are still essentially included with your Dynamics license. So I mean, and another good reason why I'm sure Microsoft would like to encourage you to use Power Automate, because if you're running them a lot, then you might need to buy more licensing. But you might not want to do that quite yet.
Yeah, that's a good. We actually built a partner built one in my system, and we had to backdate a lot of data, and we hit those limits, because so I think it's a big consideration to take in. Just a lot of things that you don't think of when you are thinking of just Dynamics. Like you have to elevate where you're thinking when you bring in the Power Automate tool.
Mhm. Some cool stuff though, so I made a little list of things that I thought about when I was like, oh, I didn't necessarily realize that I could do all these things with Power Automate. Some of them I knew, mostly because Liz has told me, they can loop through child records. I already knew that they could call APIs. I just learned the other day that apparently you can have a Power Automate fill out a Word template. So if you build a mail merge template, you could have Power Automate go through and populate it, which I thought, all right, that's kind of cool. I would not have considered that as a use case. And I like the fact that you can both trigger them on data and also schedule them to run on a regular basis, which, to your point, Ashley, is a thing that people have always wanted in Dynamics workflows. Well, can I just run it every Sunday? No, you can't run it every Sunday. Sorry. And now you can, which I think is pretty handy. And then I want to make sure that I make sure that you guys have all of your thoughts out before I jump into RPA. But I do also want to talk about the RPA categories. Sorry, do you guys have anything else to add? Ashley, you look like.
Well, it's just, I was gonna say, just touching on that scheduling thing, it's also about building a list of records to run that schedule against. That has been huge for me, because you might just have hey, query the records that fit this criteria and then run that every Sunday. You couldn't really do that in workflows either without doing it manually. So that is really huge to me, being able to build that list of records inside of Power Automate. Birthdays, people always bring up that example. How do I send a birthday email every month, right? So that this could solve that problem. But I'd say that's a really small example of the full capability of that. But I mean, to me, that's the question I would always get asked at conferences, and I'm I have no way to solve for that other than to query those people and manually kick it off on the first of the month. So now you can do it automatic. So.
Yeah, something I think that looks really cool that I haven't gotten to use in a real life scenario is the location geofence trigger. So if you, let's say, with your phone and you enter a certain radius location, you can kick off the flow. So I could see that just being useful, and it's absolutely something that we didn't have with workflows.
So does that mean I could use Flow to automatically open my internet-enabled garage door when I get close to my house?
Probably.
Wow.
You should try it.
This is where I think the possibilities are just endless, right? So I always think because I'm a Dynamics person by trade, right? I come from that space. It's so much bigger than just Dynamics. So hearing about different things going on in my organization, I'm I think Power Automate could fix that, or open my garage door, or turn on the heat at home because it's 10 degrees and there's 6 inches of snow outside. Things like that.
Yeah. I don't know. You're right. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. Can I talk about RPA now?
I will say I do know somebody who automated their lights turning on outside with Power Automate. So
Nice.
I know it's possible. All right. Yes, RPA. Marilyn, go ahead.
Okay, so you can do all that stuff, and that's all like relying on APIs, talking to things behind the scenes. And then you get into RPA, which for anybody who doesn't know, robotic process automation. Power Automate calls them UI flows. And I feel like the best way to describe this, at least the way I've been describing it, is it's like a macro, but for any application at all. So like it's literally recording clicks, like click here and then click on that and then do this and then copy and paste this data. Like you're literally scripting actions for your mouse to take and places where it can get the data to enter. And it can type things and it can click on things. And then you script this whole thing together and then you can schedule to run, either as attended or unattended. The attended one, you actually have to like click the button and watch it. The unattended, which I think is an extra license cost, then you can have like scheduled to run in the background. So you can have another flow that says every Sunday at 9 p.m. execute this UI flow, and then executes the UI flow. And I feel like that cracks open the possibilities for so many other things that would have been difficult to impossible to do in the past. So like a great use case, I need to log into this, Antique system and input data. The Antique system has no API. It has, maybe it's like it could be a console application running somewhere, and you have to like make a connection to it and then do all these keyboard commands to navigate. And you could script that through UI flow and actually have it go in and enter data, which I think is amazing. I've looked at use cases for like logging into like vendor portals to like pull reports or place orders. Instead of having to do that by hand, make a UI flow to do that. And you can do it with desktop applications. You can do it with web applications. I don't know. I was on the phone with somebody a week or so ago. She was going through this like portal that she has to log into to like place all these orders. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I think we could automate this. And, it can log in and then it can click here and then it can find the product. And she was like, wait, really? Like you could have something like do that automatically? It's like, yes, you can. It's quite amazing. I don't know if you guys have been exposed to this at all yet, but I think it's a game changer, especially for like random old technology use cases.
No, I agree. It's super exciting. I've been excited about it since I think they announced it maybe 2 summers ago. And I've seen demos and I've, definitely read about it and played with it a little, but not had a real life client like reason to implement it yet. So I think that would be fun to have a real reason to use it instead of just, demos and playing around with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have not been exposed to it a lot. Like I've heard conversations about it. I've not seen a demo yet. But so my questions on that, I guess, are, is the use case for that, like if a salesperson had to put the same information in something twice. So if it had to go in Dynamics and it also had to go in the ERP system, it could go into both through this kind of tool?
Yeah, definitely. So like if you had, obviously if you build an integration between the two, like API to API, you just transfer the data behind the scenes.
But there's no API available.
Right. If there's no API for your ERP system, then yes, exactly. You can say when this record is updated in Dynamics, trigger this flow. The flow calls the UI flow. The UI flow retrieves the source record, like, pulls all the data in from that record, then goes and logs into the ERP system and does all the data entry that it needs to do.
To me, that seems like a game changer because I see so many organizations like have multiple systems, like just depending on, it might not even be ERP, right? Mm-hmm. It could just be like, we have this system over here that does this and this, and it's just so disconnected. And so then salespeople don't want to use Dynamics, or they don't want to use anything that they have in front of them because they have to go then update it here and there, afterwards. So I could see this being a huge game changer, and not just for salespeople, but any kind of user that has to duplicate data in places. I could see that being that's where I see the application from my perspective and experience.
Yeah, it literally replaces your swivel chair, your quote unquote swivel chair integration.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
I'm like already like thinking of all the things that I could do with this.
Right. Any other thoughts? I think we're coming up on our time a little bit, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything that either of you want to bring up on Power Automate.
No, I would say just don't be scared to jump into it and learn it. There is a learning curve, but the possibilities are endless. Like I've seen things like in the reading that I've done just in the last few months that there's so much more that I can do. And I'm trying to not bite off more than like the small things and just start small and be like, okay, I'm going to just do this one thing and, build it. And I'm not replicating anything that I currently have as a workflow in our system. I'm just saying, hey, we need this new thing. Let me try it in Power Automate first. And I would say learning the expressions has been kind of difficult for me, like the conversions for like time zones. So like if you put a date on like a record, make sure your time zones are set. I mean, there's just so many nuances that you never would have had to think of just in Dynamics. So I would say just make sure that you're elevating your thinking to be above just Dynamics, because it's no longer about Dynamics. It's about the entire Power Platform. So that was my problem.
Yeah, expressions, I think, are another learning curve. If you are using expressions, I have found there's an experimental feature button under settings, and the current, like the classic expression designer is awful. Like it doesn't validate. If you click out of it and you don't like click the like check mark, it like deletes everything you did. It's just a pain. It's really difficult to use, but if you turn on the experimental features, they give you the new expression designer, and it's much, much better. And it's a per user thing. So if you are working with expressions and if you're frustrated with the current one, try that out.
Yes, thank you, Liz. That was a huge lifesaver.
It's a lot easier, isn't it?
Yeah. It really saved everything.
And it makes the window bigger too, so you're not working in this like tiny, narrow window.
Yeah. When I would say knowing what to call, I mean, I could go on and on about like just the things that I've learned just over the last few months, but like having to like set variables to like call in things, like you just never know what to call each of those when you add a new box, like when you add a new function, like learning just what each of those are, because if you're not a coder, you don't know what those terms are. That's also been like a hurdle for me. So I always just kind of tap a solution architect on the shoulder and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Please tell me how this is worded in code speak. Because like, I just don't know. I don't know coding, so I don't know what you call it when you translate it from functional to technical. So not that I think you have to be a technical person, but I do think that you need to know some of that language or begin to learn some of that language to understand how to build your functions.
It helps. Yeah.
Makes sense. But see, there's the power right there. A functional person, you have a quick conversation with a technical person, and you can still do a lot of stuff you never could have done before.
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
It's true.
It's awesome. Any parting thoughts, Liz?
I have one more thing. I recently helped someone fix a flow because it wasn't working. There's two connectors out there for D365. There's an old one, and there's one that says current environment. Always use the current environment one. Because I've seen people you start off on the wrong foot, and then it just, causes all these problems. And it's the other one's still available. So if you wouldn't know that, like, it's easy to pick the wrong one.
Yeah, so I started a trial, and that Dynamics 365 one isn't there anymore. So I wonder if they're phasing it out on new environments.
That's exciting.
But if you have an existing one, I'm sure it's still there.
Yeah, this was a month ago, so maybe they fixed it now.
Yeah.
Which would be awesome if they did.
We'll see.
We'll see. It's always a fun thing with Microsoft. We'll see. It'll probably be fine. All right. Well, I think that's it for flows. Thanks, everybody.
For today.
Yeah. See you around.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at DynamicsHotDish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.